Hi, welcome back to Unique Minds. I'm Rob O'Day, and I'm always with Rylan Kinnan behind the camera. And today we're chilling with Dave of Gritty Custom Builds. How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Why don't you explain what it is that you do to the people? Because I'm in heaven right now. This is my dream interview. So,
To put it simply, I build custom guitars from scratch, and I wind my own pickups to put in them. So I build custom guitars from start to finish.
I'm really excited for this one. So, what got you into wanting to become a luthier and build guitars?
Well, it's luthier is a tough term. I don't consider myself a luthier because I don't have any training. So I'm self-taught. That's why I consider myself a builder. Sort of along the line of other professions where you would get, official training. I'm self-taught, so I don't technically use that term. I was in the music business. A long time ago, and have been playing guitar since I was 15 years old. And as soon as I started playing guitar, I started fiddling with the guitars, and have sort of rejuvenated that love of guitars over the last few years.
Yeah, and you make absolutely stunning pieces of work. As a player, I drool over them. And the fact that you started off with no knowledge as a self-taught builder. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy feat. Mm-mm. Like, guitars are not they're not just like, oh, cut the shape, put the electronics in, and you're good to go.
Right.
There is so much that goes behind guitar building that I don't think people really kind of understand. It's not really like a thing you see on TV a lot, or
Right.
that most people talk about. So, what really has been the defining moment that made you want to do this full time? It was like, this is what I meant to do.
Oh man, it's just the love of doing it and watching your creation happen. Taking an idea from start to finish, and knowing that every portion of that build, of that creation, you have that choice to make it whichever way you want. From the woods to the colors to the electronics to the hardware to all the pieces. There's a decision, there's a choice, there's a creative aspect to every part of that, and that's what makes it so fun and interesting.
Yeah, and it being wood, you have to have some knowledge of wood and understanding of how wood works, because a lot of carpenters will understand the concept of you work with the wood, you don't make the wood work for you.
That's true. That's absolutely true, and that has guided a lot of the decisions in the build, whether it be the color or the stain or the cut or something like that. Sometimes I won't have a final idea about a guitar until I get into that wood and explore what it really looks like and feels like.
It's almost like a painting. You don't know when by the time you put the paintbrush to the canvas, you have no clue what it's going to be by the end.
Yeah.
And like some of the most beautiful guitars I think I've seen in a long time.
Thank you.
That are hand built. Mm-hmm. It's a unique process, and there's not a lot of local people who build guitars, I'd say, on this level. No, especially not with the pickups. Like, a pickups is a whole other realm, and I find that, like, even the tiny conversation we had before we started about understanding pickups, like, that alone has made me understand so much more now. And I think that's what inspired you to want to do your own pickups, because that's not, like, guitars is one thing, but taking the pickup on, that's a whole another level.
I guess it was just the ability to have that, I don't want to say control, but the total control over that, what that tone is going to be, and make sure that pickup fits the guitar perfectly, or have that creative ability to go out in left field and do something crazy, right? Like the pickup that we were talking about before we started filming. That's kind of an off the wall pickup that I'm building, and I do it because I can.
Right, and I think that's the coolest thing, is because you can.
Yeah.
Like, just, there's something I love about self-taught anything. Mm-hmm. Musicians, any artistic discipline that you choose, if you're self-taught, I think that is the most genuine way to produce art. Like in my mind, you can't be taught music. So like theory is a guideline, it's not rules. You don't follow theory. Same with painting. You're taught these concepts and these practices for certain styles, but like who's really to say that that's the rules, right? And like to be self-taught, you're creating your own path. And I think that will in time create better products, because you're physically sitting there understanding the faults, the problems, the mistakes, and correcting them, and that changes with every guitar.
Absolutely.
Like every guitar is a different thing. It's its own entity. That's why like musicians are so like, oh, don't touch my guitars, because they're almost like a living, breathing entity that we love, because there's a weird attachment from the maker to the person who plays it. And unless you play an instrument, you're never fully going to understand that love for the handcrafted. And the fact that your guitars are handcrafted is another beautiful thing, because most guitars now are manufactured, or like you said, CNC cut. They're not cut by hand anymore. They're not hand sanded. They're not stained by they're stained by a team, but they're not stained by a person who's putting in the love.
Right.
Do you think that when you build a guitar, do you ever have like a specific person in mind, that like a type of person who would be like, this guitar is meant for this type of person?
Sometimes, yeah, or a type of music, or a feel, or I mean, yeah, that inspiration comes from a lot of places. It might be a person. We talked about earlier, we chatted real briefly about the Telecaster that I built, that I had the inspiration from George Harrison's Rosewood Telecaster. It's a beautiful instrument. It's amazing. It looks as beautiful as it sounds. So things like that can really spur your creativity. I have a real passion for that quality that you used to get from vintage instruments, and not to say that I always want to copy, but they're definitely an inspiration for sure. And just that old school quality, that old school craftsmanship, and real hands-on.
I think that's what's lacking with a lot of things. A lot of things nowadays, like a lot of stuff is so manufactured, and there's not a lot of handcrafted. And handcrafted isn't as appreciated as much as I feel. It's kind of overlooked. And like when you get down to it, like I don't know if Rylan can zoom in on this, but like look at the wood grains that he gets to work with. Like I'm so jealous of the beauty that comes out of these guitars, and they're built locally.
Yeah.
Like these are rigs that you would see in guitar stores, and they're being built locally, which is a beautiful thing.
Right.
What has been, I know that you have Strats, Les Pauls, and Telecasters. Have you ever had like this one wild vision just to throw a different style and build your own?
I'm still looking for that. Yeah. You see a lot of custom makers that have that shape, or that something, that color palette, and I'm still finding mine. I'm really enjoying working with the wood tones, and I think that's sort of my signature right now is accentuating the wood qualities, and I really enjoy that part of the creation process, and again sort of making those creation decisions on what slab of wood you have. As for shape, I'll find mine. Right. I'll find it.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I think what I appreciate the most about your guitars, honestly, is that they're not so in your face.
Right.
With colors, like there's a lot of beautiful just wood tones that are brought out, and I think that, like, my biggest pet peeve is when, like we said earlier, when you take a guitar and you just like full body black it or blue, and then you're like, you don't appreciate the wood. Wood is a beautiful thing, and it's not cheap either anymore.
No, it's quite expensive, like, nowadays.
To be like, you make one mess up on a guitar too, and that's a very temperamental thing to deal with when wood can chip and and crack, and so many factors to it. How have you ever had guitars that you're working on so many hours, and all of a sudden just like, and you're like,
I have. And there's, some of the things are, just like any person that makes or builds, there's a lot of things that I'll see that maybe no one else will see. But every time you touch the guitar, you can accentuate it or ruin it. I'm looking specifically at the guitar body that's on the table right now because I can see from here one little tiny mistake that happened. Fortunately enough, it's going to be covered by the bridge. I don't know if you can see where that is, but there's one little tool mark that I have on there, and if it wasn't in the place that it was, where the bridge will be over it, that could have been disastrous for that guitar. When you're in your final phases of the guitar and you're screwing in the pickup covers, or putting on that jack plate or something, and that screwdriver slips, you got a scratch in your guitar, right? Every step of the way, you have to be super careful. Some of those I accept. This guitar here, there's that happened late in the process. I had already put the oil finish on it, and there's a bit of a tool mark there, and that's part of the guitar forever and ever and ever. I just didn't feel that guitar needed to be resanded down to fix that. It's technically considered a flaw in the guitar, but that's part of the guitar. That's part of the process,
or is
right?
it part of the character of the guitar?
Yeah, for sure. So the whole process, all along the way, there's little times where you have your successes, and you're like, "Wow, that's amazing!" Like you keep pointing out that wood grain on that one guitar style. I love that. I love the way that turned out.
Yeah.
You get your successes, and then every once in a while you're like, "Ooh, that little thing hurt." So far, I haven't had anything like totally devastating.
Yeah.
That would break my heart if if you were to just drop a guitar and it cracks in half or something. That would be painful.
Have you ever thought about getting into doing basses?
Yes. Sooner or later, I will get into basses. Those. It's a little bit of a different animal. Same theories, but a bit different. I'd just like to get my feet under myself a bit more and focus before I branch too far out.
Yeah.
Make sure I'm not going too far too fast.
No, totally. And
Right.
I think that's what's best. And you had mentioned that you've been doing. How long have you been running Gritty Customs for?
I've been running Gritty Customs for about 1.5 years. However, I had mentioned as soon as I started playing, I started fiddling. So this guitar here, no strings are on it right now. My parents bought me this guitar when I was 15 years old, and you can see there's scalloped frets here because I was a huge fan of a certain shredder back in the 90s. Yes. And you can see all the custom work here. It's not a typical, that's not the way you purchase it. And I've got this taken apart because I was actually I was going to inspect what my wiring job was when I was, 18 years old.
Wow. That's awesome.
I'm going to check it out and see what I did back then, and maybe there's a possibility I may have to redo that one. Who knows?
Right?
I mean, it played great. I played that in a band for years and years.
That's so funny.
Just curious as to how I wired that, 20-something years ago.
Yeah, and it's cool to see the evolution too.
Right.
Like, you mentioned that every guitar ends up with a different feel, and you learn more. And yeah, you can see the evolution almost.
Yeah.
Through the pieces that are just on the wall. And it's a cool experience to even be here to appreciate what they are, and then get to see the process through it. Have you ever thought about doing acoustics? I feel like that would be a lot more difficult.
It's difficult, yes. There's a lot more tools that are involved that are specialized that I just don't have. I've done some repairs on acoustics. I would like to eventually get into that, but again, it's so different from building electrics. There's so much, the way you build the bracing behind it affects your tone, and I just don't know enough about it at the moment to even try it yet.
Right. Yeah. I feel like electrics is a great place to be, especially nowadays. Acoustics are loved, but they're not. I feel like they've had their time, and there's another time about to come. But we're sitting in the what new guitars can we see?
Well, and it would be interesting to see what that evolution of the acoustic guitar is. There hasn't been too many changes in acoustic guitars in 100 years, right?
If not longer, yeah.
So, I think the biggest technological change that we've seen in acoustic guitars, the pickups for those are a lot better these days. But I don't know if I can say brand names, but you remember the acoustic guitars with the round plastic backs?
Yep.
There hasn't been all that many technological advances in acoustic guitars since then. So it would be interesting to see where they go. Can you do it out of composites? Can you, can you 3D print it? Who knows, right? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how that works out.
It would be a unique thing to see because, like, from what I've seen with acoustics, there's a lot of, like, you have to steam the wood and shape the body actually before you put, like, the front and back plates on. And those have to be glued or properly steamed, put together. And, like, that's a whole ordeal. Yep. So, like, that's obviously why Larrivee can charge, like, $4,000 for their acoustics and stuff like that. But, like, and they're handmade still. Absolutely. Which is another thing, too. Like, handmade, the quality's there, the value is there. Versus manufactured, where it's just put on a CNC machine, tossed down a convection line, basically, and it's like, all right, well, here's your guitar now. We're charging you $5,000. It doesn't, the value's not there. And there's a name, but I feel like there's something magical about hand-built.
Right.
There just is. And, like, I didn't even know coming into the interview, you did your own pickups.
Yes.
That, to me, is like, I think I'm more excited now to see the pickup aspect than I am to see like the guitar aspect, because, like, guitars is something I'm not a guitar maker, but I've definitely taken my guitars apart and fixed what I broke. So, but it's a beautiful experience to, like, even see the templates, to see the work that you've started to the completed process, and then the pickups. I'm really excited to go through this process.
Cool.
If you want to take us through, and we can start seeing how it works, because I'm a kid in a candy shop right now.
Sure, absolutely.
So we have this one here. This is one that you are working on?
This is my current, this is one of my current builds. This has two different kinds of woods on it. So
I really like that back one.
The bottom is mahogany and the top is walnut. And those got obviously glued together and then, routed as one. Little color splash there, and I made a truss rod cover out of some of the scrap wood that I also painted that blue to sort of get that splash on the neck when it's done too. Because brown is it's beautiful, but fairly monotone. I'll have the chrome hardware on there, but it's nice to have a cool little color splash on there.
Yeah, I love that, and I think you start to see that more now as, like, these almost three-tiered guitar bodies, where they have, like, a really hard back. Yeah. And then they've got this beautiful, like, the flame top maples and stuff that you see. Like, I think that guitars I think in the last 10 years, 15 years, there's been a crazy evolution in electric guitars that I don't think is, like, really appreciated, and it's really underground. Like, you have a lot of new builders coming up with really unique ideas, and, like we were talking about earlier, like, extended range.
Right.
When you start getting into 6, 7, and up to 15, like, there are 15 string guitars out there. Don't ask me why. I don't think anyone, I don't know how anyone's gonna hold that, but
I will not be making one of those.
Yeah, they're definitely difficult, but, like,
for sure,
it's a whole other beast. Like you said with basses, like, each instrument has its own, own creature. It's like its own creature, and, like, even understanding the fact that the necks, like a through neck, and, like, a full piece of wood, that's another next level too, right? Instead of just putting a neck in and getting them set in place, but, like, it's a beautiful art.
And again, there's with those infinite possibilities, there's so much to learn too, right? And learning to build a neck through, definitely something I'd love to try in the future. Right. I'm not quite there yet, but in the future that'd be amazing, because then you have your guitar build as a neck through, and then you can choose your side wings and everything. So that's a whole nother layer of how do you build those woods together. And speaking of the wood, when it comes to that, don't get me wrong, this is beautiful. I love doing this type of work, but it also came from a practical aspect too. I don't have a spray booth. And as you can see, this is my living room in my home. So I don't want to be spray balling or spray bombing stuff in here because I live here and I don't want those toxic fumes. So I use all natural products.
I love that.
I have 2 young children, so I don't want them to be exposed to those chemicals either. So not only is that a creation decision, in the creative process, but it's also a practical decision to not have cans of spray paint let loose in my house, right?
No, it's very true. And I think I think that's almost more appreciated nowadays, especially with like you have a lot of awareness with like what we put in our bodies and what we have around our bodies and around our space. And I think including that aspect to your builds also adds another element that most don't, because in business is business. You get the job done, you make the money, you continue your business. But when you're actually putting like personal thought and value into what you're building, I think it gives it a whole other like spirit. Like we were saying earlier, like it's a living thing, but yours has like a moral value to it versus just being like the teenager punk rocker who's like running around raging. So like they're elegant, they're beautiful pieces. And we were talking about different bodies and stuff. Like, do you ever just look at when you get your slab and just like, and like your brain just pictures all these different shapes and processes that you could go through?
Yeah, for sure. When the nice thing is when you buy those slabs, the companies that you buy them from are actually kind enough to individually label them. So your first choice is, I want slab number 6, and you can already see that. So you start to get your ideas, when you're shopping for those to begin with. But then once you get it in your hands and you feel it in the weight and the grain texture and all that sort of stuff, it definitely molds the process.
So with being a guitar player and knowing Les Pauls, how they weigh so much, do your guitars weigh do your Les Pauls weigh as much as regulars? Some do, but again, that depends on the wood and the thickness. This one's pretty thick, so that will have some pretty good heft to it. I haven't weighed that body fully yet, but that's a pretty good one. The one down there, that's pretty thin, so that won't be as hardy as as some of them. It's not going to peak up at the 9-10 pounds that some of those guitars right.
do.
some of those Les Pauls can weigh quite a bit. It's insane. Yeah. No, but like they look like they're a wicked weight. Like they look like, and the playability on them is just like you can see. You'd have a good time. I love the headstock. What made you choose that shape? Because it's a very unique shape. It's not.
I like how it's kind of like kind of like wings. That's.
Here's one.
There you go.
I love these headstocks.
Kind of like wings. I wanted a unique shape, so I looked online at all the others. And kind of went, that guy's using that one, that guy's using that one, and wanted to make sure that mine stood out and was unique.
So do you just get a square headstock and then you carve that in?
Correct.
Perfect.
Yeah.
See, I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah. And then again, from practical purposes, the tools that I use for this are fairly specific. So I have some sanding wheels that fit.
Just right perfect, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. See, and that's unique. Do you stain the necks as well?
Sometimes I do. Yeah. So this, you can see this one there's a light stain on that.
And then you sanded it down.
And then I sand it down. Yeah. And I just like that because it feels, to me, it just feels like it's already been loved. It's already been played, right? You see some of those old necks, and they've got the finger marks. Dirt, and you can tell where that one guy was playing. So I just feel like this already has love in it. It feels like someone's already been playing this for 20 years. So
I like that. That's a cool concept.
Yeah.
And especially for being a brand new guitar, it looks like it's got that vintage aged aspect to it.
Right.
Which is really cool. How long does it usually take you to go from development, as in like which guitar you're gonna make, to finished product?
Man, that's a tough answer, because sometimes Sometimes it's as quick as maybe a week.
Okay.
That's really fast. For
Yeah,
me.
I was gonna say that seems really fast to build a guitar.
More often than not, we're talking about a month. So from concept to parts to cutting, sanding, electronics, pickups, all that sort of stuff, it's more likely a month.
Yeah, and I mean that's realistically that still seems pretty good, especially with living a life and having kids and stuff. Like, but to put out them at that quality at that quickly seems pretty incredible.
It's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hours really focusing and you know, one of the hard parts I think about building a guitar, it doesn't seem like it would be a hard part, but it's organizing the process as well. You know, right now I'm in the process of adding layers of oil to this. So now I need to choose what else I'm doing in this room to make sure that the layers of oil can go on clean and there's no other sawdust or, you know, dirt, or, you know, if I decide to vacuum my living room when there's a wet, you know, so organizing that is also a hard part. You know, if you have multiples on the go, you want to try and, you know, set them up so you can oil a couple at a time, or you know, winding your pickups. You know, you get your pickup setup going. Maybe you want to wind 2 or 3 in a day or so. You know, things like that makes a big difference on your timing. Because if you just go one step at a time, which quite often I do, it does extend the period of time that you're working, right?
Totally. So, that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
Do you have any current ones that you're building for specific people?
I don't. I just finished one about 2 weeks ago. That was a guy had contacted me and said, "Can you build this for me?" And him and I went back and forth 3 or 4, no, actually more than that, a bunch of times on the, you know, he was specific on a certain cut. I'm not sure. Are we allowed to say the brands? The cuts?
Yeah.
Okay. He wanted a Telecaster style.
Oh, okay.
And I hadn't made one before. So we talked about what pickups he wanted in there. Did he want it, you know, to sound new or vintage? So we, you know, and then so I decided to build 2. So then this is its brother here. So yeah, when I was making the one, I decided to make 2. So
that's stunning.
Yeah, and again, you got the two layers of wood. This has an alder bottom with the walnut top. And for mine, I chose very traditional style pickups. So in the bridge pickup, we have, you know, Alnico 3 magnets with enamel coated wire. So that would be very vintage spec to the 50s Telecasters that Leo Fender would have been building. And, you know, in the bridge, we got a bit of a hotter, you know, not super hot, but it's got the Alnico 5, so it brightens it up a little bit.
It's so cool to see.
Yeah, but again, that's in your choices too, right? You know, when you have it nailed down, you're going to build a Telecaster. That doesn't answer all your questions. For my client that I built his, I put a humbucker here in the neck, and one coil was wound to sound vintage, and then the second coil on that humbucker, he could control it with a push-pull pot, and it was super hot, so it would scream in the amp when he played it, right? So just all that sort of stuff really.
See, I love that customability or that customization that you can do, because like doing that yourself without the education is impossible. Like, I struggle to even understand anything. I know how to play a guitar, that's about it. But to, like, when you start getting into the actual creation process, understanding the pickups and how to make a guitar sound the way you want it to sound,
right?
I think that's a really, really specific skill set that most don't, like. Tone is a hard thing.
Yep.
We recently interviewed Guy Pizzolato from Pizzolato Amps. So
Okay.
he's a local amplifier maker.
Oh, nice.
And he's out of Brazil, but
Okay.
he's always been like the tone. He was always obsessed with tone, so he got into amp making. And as a guitar player, like, you do eventually start to hit this point where it's like you stop being a player and you start becoming more of the musician who understands tone, gear, and all that kind of stuff. And when you get to sit and appreciate guitars that are handcrafted, you start to appreciate them a little more, I feel, and you start to see that beauty that was there back in the day with like vintage guitars. Because it's, yeah, like you see an old Gibson, and as a guitar player, you're gonna drool over it.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's kind of how I feel with these. They look like they're vintage. They have this incredible feel to them and look to them.
That's the quality level that I definitely shoot for.
And that's a good thing to see, especially with, well, I guess being a guitar player, like I'm very biased, but with like such a beautiful thing, you know what I mean? Like I feel all guitars are beautiful, but it's a different a different appreciation when you see somebody who like speak to somebody who makes them versus somebody who just plays them.
And it is a combination of practical skills and art. Because there is the creative process to it, but when you're building guitars, you need to have an understanding of the wood and the electronics and all these other aspects to it that makes it super interesting, and it is quite a large skill set. Because quite typically woodworkers work wood and that's it, or electricians work. There's not too many places where you have crossover.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've got about like 4 trades going on here right now,
and that's what makes it so interesting. There's and an infinite amount of things to learn.
Yeah, and I mean like even the clear coating is not like, if anybody's ever clear coated, I'm sure they know and they'll understand. It's not a it's not a fun thing to do.
Well, and also you get to choose that too, because I choose when to stop.
Yeah,
and if it's not shiny enough for me, I keep going. If it kind of hits that, this is a bit dusty. If it hits that that level of shine or matte that I want, that determines how many layers, how many times you go back and put more on, and so that's that's a huge part of that final look as well.
And you were also getting into like color staining as well, with the red one on back there, and then there was a green one, and it's like green by far my favorite, but I love I can't remember what that one's called. Is that the Firefly or Spitfire?
Spitfire.
Spitfire. Like, I love the staining on that.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Actually, the inspiration for that color was like an old leather chair. If you can think of like some of those old like vintage,
I totally get it.
Like a smoking chair, right?
Yeah. No, it's funny that's the inspiration of the color. It's like a leather chair. Well, inspiration can come from anything.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
No, it's cool. And you have the pickup setup where you wire pickups.
Yep.
I'm curious to see this process.
Okay, you want to see a little bit of that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we'll hop over here and see that, because this is I've never seen this done.
So I'm midway through a pickup right now, and this is a pickup for that Les Paul Jr. style that is on the table.
Oh, okay.
So the pickup style for this it's called a P90. It is a single coil, but this is one of the original vintage style pickups that would have been in 50s guitars. And what I'm doing to this is I'm actually going to double stack it. So we have this set of coils, and then I'm going to coil the next one reverse from it, and that'll be noise canceling. So you quite often hear guitars that have buzzes in them or stuff like that. So this will eliminate that buzz and also allow for some pretty high output.
Okay, so you wrap one way.
Yep.
And then you mentioned like thousands of times.
Yes, this one was wrapped 12,000 times.
Jeez.
Right?
And then the opposite is what causes the noise cancellation?
Correct.
Why? That's where that's where I get lost in the pickups. It's like I'm like, I don't understand this.
I don't understand fully why. I just know that's the way it is.
See, we work great. We're very like-minded. I like it.
When it comes to the actual physics and explanation of the electromagnets, which is what I'm building, I've sorry to say I have to feel a bit ignorant on it. I just know that this is what they are and how they and how they work, but the science behind it, I'm still a little confused on it, to be 100% honest.
It's super unique.
Yeah, and I'm sure someone watching this will yell at me, but
Oh yeah, I'll get a call. Rob, you're not the brightest, bro. It's
pass
just
it on.
It's common sense.
when you hear him, pass it on. So this is my pickup winder, and like I said, I've already got it set up. We're using 42 gauge wire, so it's really thin, kind of like hair. And there's different varieties of the wire, just like there's different varieties of magnets. And this one, I'm shooting for a little bit less winds than that. I'm shooting for about 10,000 winds.
Oh wow.
So we just spin this. And you want to get it nice and tight, but even.
Cool process.
All the way around. See, once you get that going. And this, unfortunately, winding pickups was, that was a huge learning curve. When you're dealing with wire that's this thin, and you're winding it that many times, there's a lot of room for error. So there was a fair bit of pickups that I wound that I had to take apart and start over just because they weren't wound properly, not tight enough. You know, the wire came loose. It didn't, the conductivity wasn't correct.
There's a lot that goes into it.
There's a lot of parts to it, yeah. But, ultimately in an electric guitar, the wood and your pickup is the biggest driver for your tone in that guitar. So then you have a lot of creative input to what that tone for that guitar is going to sound like. And for this one, it definitely has a super vintage look to it, but I want it to have a bit more of a modern sound. So sort of taking that vintage with a twist, if you will.
So would vintage have less wraps? Is that kind of what the theory is there?
Yeah, quite typically, more vintage stuff would have a bit less wraps. There's always a very specific set of wraps, humbuckers. Single coils. They're usually 10,000 wraps.
Oh, okay.
And that's pretty standard. It's hard to talk and concentrate at the same time.
I totally understand.
So yeah, I need about 2,000 more wraps on this guy. And that bobbin, it's only double-sided taped on there, so I've really got to watch that it doesn't wobble. If something bad starts to happen, I want to try and catch it as quick as I can, because the last thing I want to do is cut all this wire off to start over.
Yeah, I can imagine that unwrapping a pickup would not be easy with an as like 10,000 wraps.
No, you've got to cut everything apart, and then all your wire becomes just recycle.
Yeah,
you can't reuse it at all. But all my strings and wire get recycled.
That's wicked.
I send them back to Dario.
Oh, okay.
And they have a recycling program.
I like to hear that.
Yeah.
We also work with a local nonprofit organization out of Vancouver that makes rings out of like guitar strings.
Oh wow! Cool.
Yeah, so he recycles old guitar strings. So I love seeing that recycle element behind instruments.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot, I think the concept of upcycling, even with instruments, would be a cool thing. Like you were saying, with using different types of wood that are local. Those kind of things, I think, would make, I guess, the art that much more appreciated, because it is reflective of where it's from.
There's a very well-known guitar maker in New York that upcycles wood from vintage buildings.
Oh, I like that.
And the wood that they're getting is, it's quite often already 100, 150 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty cool thing to have. All right, we're almost done here.
Such a cool process to see. so cool. Oh, wow, eh?
Yeah, pretty neat.
I don't know if you can get a good shot of that, right? Look how cool that looks. I love the color of that wire.
Mm-hmm.
So the gauge of wire, what does that affect?
It affects how many winds you can put in there. Standard is 42 gauge,
okay.
but if you're gonna do a super big overwind, 43 is a bit thinner, and it does actually make quite a difference to being able to wind it more.
Okay, so just the more it doesn't affect like the tone or anything, and other than the sense that more wraps will make it
More wraps
brighter
make
tone,
it
I guess, or
brighter
louder.
tone, make it louder. Yeah, for sure. And it is the amount of wraps that makes that difference. Right.
That's so cool.
Yeah. But this is all very finicky.
So, what type of is this? You said this was a double stack you're making?
This is going to be a double stacked P90.
Okay.
And the wire that I'm using is 42 gauge poly coated.
That is so cool.
Mm-hmm. So then these will be stacked together like that. Right. And then this is what the outer cover will look like once it goes into the guitar.
Okay.
Right.
So those are wired together then, and then stacked, wired into your guitar.
Right.
And then oh wow.
So we'll have a 4-wire lead. So 2 wires will go to one side, 2 wires will go to the other side. And with your push-pull pot in your guitar, you'll be able to choose as to whether you're using one coil or both.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What a crazy process.
There we go.
That is so cool. I've never actually even seen online a pickup made. I never thought about looking up how they were made or even how they worked. I just knew that pickups were essential in guitars.
You put it in the guitar and it makes noise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm very caveman that way. So these are double. These ones, what are these?
That's a humbucker.
So that's a humbucker.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So
And are they both wrapped individually or are
Yes.
they wrapped together as one?
individually.
Okay.
And then with that one, you see it's only got the 2-wire lead on it.
Yeah.
So it's got the solid core and the wrap. So then those always operate together. You can't, when it's wired that way, it's not split.
Okay, so that's... See, and how many different types of pickups are there in reality if you were to break them down by like humbuckers, single coil ribbons, and then...
Oh, man. There is lots, because, yeah. Your main 3 styles are going to be the single coils like this that you would see in Strats or
like a
Telecaster,
Stratocaster.
right? Your
Humbuckers.
And then your
double stacked.
And normally it would just be the regular P90. I'm doing a double stacked just because you want. Just because I can.
Right? I love that.
Right? So originally, when Leo Fender, Leo Fender started using single coils when he started making the Hawaiian guitars, so like the lap steels, right? But then they found that they made noise, and then Seth Lover was the person who found out that when you take 2 of them and wrap one this way and then one that way, you noise cancel.
Okay. Right? Like even figuring that out would have been just a process and a half.
Right. So yeah, Leo Fender was kind of he was known for the single coils, and then it was Gibson.
So before single coils, what did they use? Because you see in like old guitars before their Fenders, they're a unique They look very with the
You know,
metal.
I knew, and now it can't. Now it's not coming to me.
That's understandable.
It's not, and I just read that in a book too, not that long ago. And it's not coming to me.
Because that's a like even the evolution of pickups, I guarantee, is like a crazy topic to just like dive into.
Absolutely, and now you get into the more modern ones like active pickups that are battery powered. You know, so there's lots. I mean, this is your basic shapes though. So single coil, the humbucker, and the P90. Those are the three basic shapes. But again, with those three shapes, you end up with a lot of variants and a lot of creative ability to change it up. Even in the wire. So this was 42 gauge poly coated wire.
Yeah.
Then there's other varieties too and it'll affect your tone. So this one is a Formvar. Sort of a more, this is a more vintage style wire. You can see the different color on that, and it all has to do with just the different coating on there. So the different coatings, the biggest tone difference on the coatings is how they wrap.
Okay.
You know, the poly, since that's the newest, that can be the most consistent with the thickness of what the coating is on the wrap. So supposedly you can get the most even, but your Formvar and your enamel are your traditional vintage coverings. I like the color on that one. That one's cool.
Oh yeah, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, that's your enamel.
I was gonna say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's what they would have used back in like the 50s, 60s, building them.
Yeah.
See, that's cool because it's like, where's it going to go to next? Because there's still that evolution of, like, guitars are not, they've been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah. Like, stringed instruments is not something that we've just discovered, you know what I mean? But it is, like, to a certain point, it's like we were just, like, accepting what they were, and then we finally hit this point in time where we're like, hey, there's so much more we can do with these. Yep. And we're, like, in that time period right now, even with like the extended range 7 strings and 8 strings, and then you have new pickup companies that are pushing the bars.
Right.
You have the headless guitars.
Yeah.
Like those guitars, they don't go out of tune. They're perfect intonation, and like they don't have a head.
Right.
Like there's the evolution of this musical instrument is getting. It's such a beautiful stage. It's almost like it's still a baby. Mm-hmm. Like, and guitar's been around forever. But if you really think about like the actual evolution of a guitar is from about the 50s, I'd say, till now. That's what, 70 years of, we're not even 100 years in.
Right.
And look how advanced things have gotten in the past 20 with the active pickups and with like the extended range for like Steve Vai wanted a 7-string, and that inspired an entire generation of guitar players. Like, there's a story we heard recently about Steve Vai driving in a car, and he heard a song on the radio and instantly knew they were 7 strings and not dropped down 6 strings because it was Korn.
Right.
And Korn was the first people who bought his guitar, his signature, the Gem, I believe it was, the 7-string, and they wanted to play like Steve Vai. So that inspired an entire generation, just because one guy was like, I want to add one more string.
Right.
So yeah, like, and then you see like Jared Dines, who's playing a 15-string, and then there's other people who are playing higher strings. So like we're pushing the evolution of musical instruments more in the last 20 years than we have in 2,000 years.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any more acceptance to, you know, the idea of MIDI guitars and computer guitars. I know Gibson touched a little into that, and it wasn't very well taken. But the opportunity for that is certainly huge.
There is, if anybody knows who Datsik and Excision are, they're 2 local huge electronic producers from Kelowna. They both work with the drummer of Pendulum, and they're a group called Destroyed. Mm-hmm. And they play MIDI guitars that use their synthesizing drum, like their dubstep sounds.
Oh, right on.
So they'll be like, wah, 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 wah. So like, it's there. There's a group that's playing them.
That's
so like,
awesome.
It's just like, we're still pushing the limits to
right.
like, there's no limit to what music has.
Right.
Like we were saying earlier, like theory is just a guideline. Like these are just the rules not rules. These are the guidelines we've created in the knowledge we have through the years and years and years of building guitars, that we're starting to realize technology can advance it in so many levels.
Right.
It's insane. Like you think back to when the first double neck guitar was made, and then you have Michelangelo Matteo with the double guitars, right? Like there's so many different, like there's so many, they changed so much, and like we kind of like, oh yeah, that worked, that didn't work, that worked, definitely didn't work.
Right.
Like you'll see vintage guitars, like Vox guitars from Japan, that have like weird switches and stuff like that you'll never see on a guitar ever again, because it worked at that time, didn't work, we got rid of it. And I still think that we're like pushing that, and I feel like the main guitars, like you've left the Les Paul, the Fender Strat, the Telecaster, I feel like these guitars are eventually going to become obsolete.
Don't say it. No.
I know. I don't. I feel like the bodies themselves will become obsolete, or the way we're building them now. In 20 years, they'll be like electronic touch screen guitars with pickups that like you can like change your ear setting and it changes your tone. Like we're in a really weird time, and I think
very possible, but I think there'll always be some nostalgia for those,
for guitar lovers like us who actually genuinely like, oh, this guitar is like 90 years old and I love it. Yeah, no, I totally. But I think that you keeping your guitars handcrafted, I love the wood grain. You know what I mean? Like you don't cover up the beauty of that, where I find like a lot of like major producers are, but they're just like flat black or like gloss black paints, and like wood is so beautiful.
But that allows them to use woods that maybe aren't as pretty, that aren't as expensive, that aren't as
and that also kind of puts you into a new factor of like, well, then where's the value on that? Is it really worth the money you guys are charging, or just the name value? Because you see that a lot in modern days, where a company has built themselves up and they use the reputation they have and stop putting out the quality. And it just kind of like goes like, oh, whatever, it's okay. They've built themselves up to that point. They've earned it.
Making $5,000 guitars a day.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Exactly. Like it's the value's not there, and I think that people do understand that, like that handcrafted physical touch of somebody putting some time, investment, energy, and love it's more appreciated than I think it has been over the last, like me growing up. I know the last 20 years of my like growing up, I've noticed there has been a big progression in people loving the underdogs. Right. You know, like the local farming, and like we're all trying to become more community based and stop pushing out so much. So I think that you being in a year and a half at this is just like the perfect start. I think that like these guitars are going to like expand and grow, and eventually we're going to be looking at gritty customs like we look at Gibson and we look at PRS. Hopefully. You know what I mean? Like that's great. That's how I feel, because there's these guitar companies, aside from Godin, Dylan, and I may be wrong, but most of them are in the States and are created in Indonesia, created in Korea, and created in China. They're not made in Canada. They're not made in the U.S. They're not. Yeah, the name is there. The company name is in the States, but the guitars are not being built in the States. Right. Kind of a thing, you know what I mean? And to bring it back home is a beautiful thing. Right. And I think that that's where these will excel, as where people will start to realize what we already know as musicians, that, you know, handcrafted is where it's at.
Sure is. Sure is. It's where the heart and soul is.
If you had any advice for somebody who was young and wanting to start to build guitars and was just like, that's what I want to do with my life, what advice would you give them?
Well, on a practical level, I'd say take your guitar apart. Start playing with it, right? See how it works. I mean, we live in a super fortunate age where, you know, YouTube videos, all the information is out there. YouTube videos, books, You know, I still have Dan Erlewine's book on you know, how to repair and build guitars, right? So, and that thing's, man, that thing's got to be 30, 40 years old by now. The information is out there. Just start absorbing it and find your path. Do it. We're in a really interesting time right now where people are discovering that what they have to bring forward is definitely worth it. Sorry. You know, I also find part of my decision to go more full time with building guitars had to do with COVID. You know, as a chef, I didn't have much work, so I had a lot of time. So I was able to explore this. I was able to put the time in. You know, same with a lot of musicians that had found, you know, a new way to, you know, a new creative process to write their music. And you know, once the studios opened back up, lo and behold, they had a whole new album's worth of stuff because everybody was locked inside their house for a couple of years, right? So, and I think a lot of people are discovering that about themselves, that there is a creative side. We like purchasing at the handmade stores and from, you know, person to person, as opposed to, you know, going to a big box store or a big chain store. It's a more satisfying thing. There's more, you know, it's person to person, and you can't beat that, right?
No.
You know, if I sell you a guitar, and you say, "Hey, man, can you tweak this? Can you fix that?" 100%. I stand by every guitar. I'll, you know, bring it to Guitar Center or something. They'll go, "Ha ha, yeah, we'll charge you $100 an hour." You know, right? So there's, you know, I stand by it. Where, and not to say that other companies won't, but you know, I'll build you a guitar that you want. That to your specs. You don't have to go shopping. You tell me what you want. I'll build it. So, you know, person to person buying is definitely a wave that I think we're gonna have for quite a while.
Especially after 2 years of not being able to see people and be within 6 feet of them. You know,
Right,
everyone was
right.
like, "Oh no, you sneezed. You got the
Yeah.
plague." Like, I definitely think that we are.
Even if it's, you know, even if it's some person that's, you know, they're making candles or, you know, whatever your craft may. There's a lot of people that are selling paintings now or furniture. You know, there's all kinds of builders, makers, artists, craftspeople that explored that time that they had that are now coming out with some cool stuff.
Yeah, we're in I like to say like a new renaissance.
For sure.
Like we are at a perfect time for our society to become what we were meant to be.
Right.
Like our full potential, each individual finding themselves. And I think we're in a beautiful time, and I'm really excited for that. I want to thank you for having us and being
Thank you
part
very
of
much.
this. This has been absolutely incredible, and I feel like I need to go home and play guitar now.
I appreciate you coming out to my shop. This is great. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, we will see you next time.